Hey, it's your buddy Bob again. I'm still in New Jersey, just outside New York City. Another episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue as we seek out those great pop and rock acts of the 1950s to 1990s. So we're on to Passaic, New Jersey today, the home of the early girl group known as the Shirelles. They were led by Shirley Owens, hence the name, the Shirelles. These girls went to Passaic High School together, and they had numerous big hits in the 60s. Their first number one in 1960 was called Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? And this was the first song written by the great duo of Carole King and her then-husband, Jerry Goffin. This convinced them to go into songwriting full-time. They were very young. And they did so at the famous, you guessed it, Brill Building in New York City that we visited earlier when we were in Manhattan. Well, the Shirelles' signature song came 2 years later, rose to number one as well, Soldier Boy. Here is Shirelles Boulevard in front of Passaic High School at 170 Paulison Avenue in Passaic. From Passaic, it's a short drive up to Garfield, New Jersey. Here, Felix Cavalier, Dino Donnelly, Gene Cornish, and Eddie Brigatti formed a band. Eddie Brigatti was the younger brother of David, who played with Cavaliers in a band called the Starlighters. This was the backup band to Joey D and the Starlighters, who headlined the Peppermint Lounge in New York City. We visited that in an earlier rock and roll travelogue. These guys had a number one with the Peppermint Twist. Well, the four band members I just talked about played their first gig together near their homes in Garfield, New Jersey, next to the train station in Garfield. No longer standing was the club where they played, called the Choo Choo Club, given its name because of the proximity to the train station. Here's a look down from the tracks to the abandoned lot today, 94 Passaic Street. These were the Young Rascals, and soon after they became known simply as the Rascals. Their two biggest hits in the mid to late 60s, Good Lovin' and People Gotta Be Free in 1968. This song was an appeal to peace and understanding after a tumultuous 1968 in the U.S. Well, it's been a roller coaster ride so far on this edition of Rock and Roll Travelogue. With that in mind, we head over to the site of the one-time Palisades Amusement Park, overlooking the Hudson River straight into New York City. And if you're from that part of the country, you might remember the jingle, very catchy jingle. It went like this: Palisades has the rides, Palisades has the fun, so come on over. Shows and dancing are free, so's the parking, so gee, come on over. Palisades swings all day and after dark. Ride the coaster, get cool in the waves in the pool. You'll have fun, so come on over. This come on over was to entice New Yorkers to come over by ferry to Jersey or by car, as the park was located on the cliffs on the edge of the river on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. The iconic park was demolished in 1971. Today, 4 high-rise apartment buildings sit at the site, but the memories will never die. Here's a marker dedicated to the memory of the park and signed by famous New York DJ Cousin Brucey, who had many radio shows from the park. Just a couple of pavers around the memorial that tell us a little bit about some of the memories. Well, in 1962, singer Freddie Cannon had one of his biggest hits called Palisades Park about this place. And the writer was a guy named Chuck Barris, who later became a game show creator, shows like The Dating Game and The Newlywed Game in the 60s. I just loved a show that Chuck Barris hosted in the late 70s called The Gong Show. It was a silly, silly show, but it always made me laugh out loud. And I must say, I've never found anybody who thought it was as good as I did. Ironically, Chuck Barris, who was a Philadelphia native, died in Palisades, New York. Here's Freddie Cannon, pictured with your host in 1974. Freddie Cannon from Revere, Massachusetts, by the way. Well, one last stop in Jersey. These guys were school friends in Jersey City, just across the river from New York City, formed in the mid-'60s to do jazz. It took about 10 years for them to hit the big time as an R&B, funk, and disco band. Robert Cool Bell, with his brothers and several others, became Kool and the Gang. And they lived in this neighborhood at one time. This is Kool and the Gang Way at Maple and Pacific by Whiten in Jersey City, New Jersey. Big hits in the 70s included Jungle Boogie, Hollywood Swingin', Too Hot, Ladies' Night, and the 80s gave us Celebration, Joanna, and the cover of Cherish, which had been a number one about 20 years before by the Association in 1966. Kool and the Gang are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, before we wrap up this edition of Rock and Roll Travelogue, I want to check in on a singer by the name of Benjamin Earl Nelson. Now, he was born in North Carolina, but he lived most of his adult life nearby in Teaneck, New Jersey, and so that's why we mention him in this segment. By the late 50s, his group, the Five Crowns, became the R&B group The Drifters, and he sang lead on their only number one called Save the Last Dance for Me. And soon after, he left the Drifters to go solo. At that time, he became known as Ben E. King. And in the early 60s, he had two monster hits, Spanish Harlem, later covered by Aretha Franklin, and his biggest solo hit, Stand By Me, like Spanish Harlem, written by the Hall of Fame duo of Lieber and Stoller. Stand By Me is one of Rolling Stone magazine's top 500 songs of all time. Ben's career began to fade in the mid-'60s with the advent of the British invasion, but in the mid-1970s he made a comeback with a song called Supernatural Thing. It was a top 10 hit. And here's your host with Benny King. At the time, this song was a hit in 1975. Benny King is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Drifters. Well, I gotta bounce. This is your buddy Bob on Rock and Roll Travelogue saying until next time, good heart and stout luck.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.